Today's webinar, as you know, I'm editor and publisher of HR Professionals Magazine, and we want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And I think you're going to find this webinar very beneficial. It is navigating HR compliance, which we all need an update on like quarterly these days. So we appreciate our host today, JER HR Group, for presenting this webinar. And remember that, as always, you're going to get one SHRM PDC and one HRCI business credit. And now just a few housekeeping notes. You are in listen-only mode today. However, the session is participative and we love your engagement. So please type your questions in the chat box or your comments. We welcome your comments because we love your engagement. And our speakers will get to those at the end of today's presentation. So, as always, you do get your credits, one SHRM PDC, one HRCI business credit, provided that you stay on the 60 minutes, the entire 60 minutes, because it is required by SHRM and HRCI. And following today's webinar, you're going to receive a brief survey about the webinar, and we would appreciate your feedback and any suggestions you have for future topics. Our next webinar will be Wednesday, June 25th at 10 a.m. Central, and it will be sponsored by DataFacts. And I will be presenting the webinar, and it will be on social intelligence for HR pros. So save that date. And now I want to introduce you to today's speakers. We have 3 speakers for today, and they are all very great subject matter experts because they've all been in the business for quite a while. Becky Page.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to be moving.
Pardon me?
It just doesn't seem to be moving. So hold on a second here. A little technical difficulty.
Okay.
There we go.
Good to go?
Good to go.
All right. And as you can see on our screen, Becky, we call her Becky Page, is going to be one of our speakers today. She's the former president of HR at Human Resources Plus and the co-founder and owner who owned and operated the organization for 20 years. JER HR Group acquired HRP in January 2023. Before founding HRP, Becky served as the Vice President of Human Resources for Cordillera. I hope I pronounced that right, Becky. A 7,000-acre premier golf community, in Vail, Colorado. With over 600 employees, she is widely recognized as an expert in strategic HR management, benefits administration, finance, and state and federal employment laws. Someone we need to know for sure. And we have Teresa Frill, who is a seasoned HR consultant with 28 years of experience helping organizations navigate employment law compliance and workforce challenges. She has led HR audits, developed inclusive workplace policies, and provided guidance on multi-state employment issues, employment relations, and investigations. Teresa has a strong background in hospitality and other industries, and she brings practical, actionable insight to support compliant, ethical, and effective workplace practices. And lastly, we have Christy. Christy is an experienced HR consultant with over 30 years of experience, helping organizations navigate employment law and compliance, risk management, and workforce challenges. She specializes in HR audits, HR policy audits, federal employment law, and practical strategies to reduce legal exposure. Christy is known for her clear communication and actionable guidance, and she partners with clients to build compliant, ethical, and effective workplace practices. And now I'm going to turn it over to Becky Page. Thanks for joining us today, and be sure and type your questions and comments in the chat box for us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for your time today. For our agenda, we're going to be covering about 8 critical federal employment laws. We're going to talk about some emerging compliance challenges such as pay transparency. We're going to discuss compliance challenges for remote and multi-state work. And then we're going to talk about implementing practical compliance strategies, which will help limit your risk. Also, we have a resource slide at the end if you want to take a deeper dive into the federal laws that we're going to be discussing today. As far as the learning objectives, you're going to understand critical federal employment laws. You're going to gain clarity on some of these federal regulations. We're going to identify some emerging compliance challenges. And lastly, implementing practical compliance strategies so you walk away with some actionable steps. With that overview of today's agenda and learning objective, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa, who will kick off our presentation. And we will be turning off our video during the presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, Teresa.
Right. Thank you so much again for joining us today. I'm not going to be reading through each slide because you will be receiving a copy of the presentation and a recording. So I'll be reading through each of the slides, not be reading through each of the slides, but rather referring to my notes for discussion. So, if you're trying to keep up, know that I'm not reading directly off the slide. So I am going to kick off the webinar discussing Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and specifically starting in the hiring process. So discrimination in the hiring process occurs when an employer treats applicants unfavorably or unfairly based on protected characteristics under the federal, state, or local laws. Starting with job postings and recruitment. Some things to keep in mind is to make sure that you use neutral language. Avoid language that suggests a preference for a certain gender, age, or ethnicity. Widen your recruitment efforts. Don't restrict recruiting to just channels that disproportionately exclude protected groups. And no discriminatory advertising. Job ads must not express preferences based on protected characteristics. Include an EEO statement in job postings and applications. This affirms the company's commitment to non-discriminatory hiring practices. During the interview process, try to make sure to ask only job-related questions. You should avoid questions about marital status, race or ethnicity, age, gender or sexual orientation, disability status, whether the applicant has children or what their childcare arrangements might be, religious practices or holidays, and especially citizenship. Be consistent. If possible, try to use the same set of questions for all candidates applying for the same role. In your final selection criteria, focus on qualification. Evaluate based on skills, experience, and job-related criteria, not on personal characteristics. Avoid favoring or rejecting candidates based on protected groups. You may be asked for some accommodations, so be prepared to reasonably accommodate an applicant's religious beliefs or those with disabilities, of course, unless doing so would impose an undue hardship on your company. Some of those accommodations may be providing accessible interviews, flexibility with interview times, maybe providing extra time on any type of written tests or electronic tests, or rescheduling interviews for religious holidays. If you conduct background checks must be consistently applied. They must be job-related and necessary. You should not use background checks or credit reports that disproportionately disqualify members of protected groups, of course, unless that is justified by a business necessity. Avoid conducting background checks only on certain groups. So running criminal checks only on your male applicants. Or automatically rejecting applicants with a criminal history where that is not job related. Many states have adopted ban the box laws. I'm sure you've heard of them, which restrict when and how criminal history can be considered. Typically, you cannot conduct a background check until after a conditional job offer has been made. And typically that can be either a verbal or a written job offer. I think preferably written would be best practice. And make sure you're training your hiring managers. Ensure that everybody involved in the recruitment process understand what questions and criteria are appropriate under Title VII. All right, Becky, you can advance to slide 5.
All right, it's locked up again.
Okay, there we go. Key employment practices covered by Title VII. So we already talked about hiring. Now we're going to talk about disciplinary actions and terminations. Any termination, discipline, or demotion decisions cannot be based on protected characteristics. Make sure you have consistent and documented performance-based practices in place. They are essential. Promotion and compensation and training opportunities. Make sure there's equal access to promotion and professional development opportunities. Favoritism based on protected classes is prohibited. Employers cannot pay employees differently for the same work based on race, sex, religion, or other protected traits. However, if the pay is different, you should be able to identify a factor for the pay difference, which could be tenure with the company, experience, or even performance. Benefits must be offered equitably. So harassment prevention and retaliation. Title VII prohibits harassment. This includes sexual harassment that creates a hostile or offensive work environment. It is the employer's responsibility to prevent, address, and correct harassment within the workplace. Employers may not retaliate against employees or applicants for filing a discrimination complaint, participating in an investigation, or opposing discriminatory practices. Job assignments and classifications. Employees cannot be segregated or assigned jobs based on stereotypes or assumptions about a protected class. Duties and responsibilities should be fairly distributed. Religious accommodations. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations for sincerely held religious beliefs and practices, unless doing so would cause undue hardship. And under Title VII, undue hardship is defined as more than minimal cost or burden. Sex discrimination to include sexual harassment, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Employers cannot make employment decisions based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Employers must prevent and address harassment quickly and effectively. All right, if you can advance to slide 6.
I'm still attempting. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so slide 6 talks about employer responsibilities, enforcement and remedies. Some additional employer responsibilities would be to provide training to your supervisors and employees on Title VII requirements. Investigate complaints promptly and thoroughly. That should take precedence. You need to kind of clean off your desk and focus directly on that if you do have a complaint come in. And also maintain records of employment actions to ensure consistency and fairness. All right, Becky, I am ready for slide 7. So in 2024, the EEO received 88,531 new charges. This is a 9.2% increase over 2023. Retaliation complaints, still kind of leading that by a large margin. Disability, race, and sex remain consistently high as well. And age-related discrimination remains significant too. Slide 8, please, Becky. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to move into Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. And I'm going to start that with the ADA guidelines to follow during the hiring process. Again, we're going to start with those job descriptions. Job descriptions, you need to clearly define essential job functions in your job descriptions. What are those core duties necessary to perform the job? It should include physical and mental job demands, as this can help assess reasonable accommodations later. Include the location of the position, identify whether it is an on-site position only, is it hybrid, or is there an opportunity for remote work? During the application process, ensure that the application process is accessible to individuals with disabilities. Again, having online forms would be helpful, and they should be screen reader compatible. Be prepared to provide reasonable accommodations during this stage as well. Again, alternate formats and assistance with applications. During the interview process, do not ask questions about disabilities or medical history before making a job offer. Some permitted questions would be those that focus on ability to perform the job functions, which can look like, can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation? Be consistent with all applicants and avoid assumptions about a candidate's capabilities based on any visible or perceived disabilities. Reasonable accommodations. If you have a candidate voluntarily disclose a disability or request accommodation during that pre-offer process, you must consider the reasonable accommodation, again, if that's extra time on a test, etc. But do not retaliate or treat the candidate unfavorably due to the request. So ADA reasonable accommodations, let's dive into that a little bit. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations to employees with disabilities unless doing so would cause undue hardship. Decisions must be based on the ability to perform essential job functions with or without reasonable accommodations. And we'll talk a little bit about what undue hardship may look like here in a minute. Some examples of accommodations might be modified work schedules, assistive technology, physical workspace adjustments, job restructuring, or remote work options. Every case is going to look a little bit different. The accommodation process should involve an interactive, good faith discussion with the employee. Medical information and disability-related communications must be kept confidential and stored separately from the employee's regular personnel files. Disclosure of the accommodation request should be strictly limited to only individuals involved in the accommodation process. Undue hardship. Employers are not required to provide accommodations if the accommodation is overly costly, substantially disruptive, or would fundamentally alter the nature or operation of the business. Again, undue hardship is assessed on a case-by-case basis. Retaliation protection. It is unlawful to retaliate against an employee for requesting accommodations, filing an ADA complaint, or participating in an ADA investigation. All right, so we're already on slide 9, and this is just a recap of what I just discussed. Becky, if you could move to slide 10, please. All right, here we have some compliance tips for employers and some common mistakes to avoid. Failing to recognize a disability disclosure, automatically denying an accommodation without first assessing feasibility, retaliating against employees for requesting, and assuming what the employee needs instead of asking. All right, let's move to slide 11. All right, now I'm going to jump into Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA. Some of the key ADA guidelines, again, I'm going to cover from a hiring and employment practices standpoint. We're going to start with those job postings and advertisements. Avoid age biased language, such as using terms like, you're looking for a young and energetic team. Maybe even saying recent college graduate or junior level position unless it's clearly tied to experience and not age. Do not set age limits unless age is a bona fide occupation qualification, which could be rare. Some examples of age discrimination in hiring in the job posting, stating that you only want a max 5 years of experience. Why is this a potential problem? Because it could easily exclude older, more experienced candidates. Not interviewing older applicants despite of qualifications. That's disparate treatment. Asking individuals when they graduated high school or college. This obviously can reveal age. Rejecting candidates based on being overqualified without justification. Often a cover for age bias. During the application process and screening, do not ask for birth date, high school graduation year, or other age-related details during the interview or on your employment application unless it's required by law, security clearances, etc. A lot of states do prohibit this as well. Interview practices focus on skills and qualifications, not assumptions based on age. Again, avoid those age-related questions. Be consistent in questions and evaluations across all age groups, kind of going back to that, having the same set of questions for each position. Evaluate all candidates based on job-related criteria only. Do not assume. An older applicant is overqualified, or that they won't adapt to new technologies, or that they may not fit in with your younger team. These assumptions are stereotypes and not valid hiring criteria. Training and documentation. Train your hiring managers and supervisors to avoid age-based biases. Document all hiring decisions with clear job-related reasons for selection or rejection. If you find yourself in a position where you do have a reduction in force, a RIF, or experiencing layoffs, employers should carefully review selection criteria to ensure these decisions are based on non-age related documented factors. And we do have a tip there on the screen for severance agreements and just some additional information there. Benefits and policies. Benefits provided to older employees cannot be reduced based on age. There may be some very limited exceptions to this. Policy should not cap benefits, force retirement, or offer lesser terms based on age. The ADA also prohibits age-based harassment that creates a hostile work environment. Employers must address inappropriate age-related comments, jokes, or exclusionary behaviors. Again, documentation and fair practices always provide clearly documented performance issues, qualifications, and decision-making processes to defend against claims of age discrimination. Regularly audit employment practices and policies to ensure that they do not unintentionally disadvantage older workers. So again, slide 7 is a recap of the guidelines that I just went through. And Becky, you can advance to slide 12, please. All right, so now I'm going to move on to Immigration Reform and Control Act. Here are some key considerations when hiring under IRCA. Obviously, we all know about the Form I-9. Every new hire, citizen or non-citizen, must complete Form I-9. Section 1 of the form needs to be completed by the employee on or before their first day of work. Section 2 must be completed by the employer within 3 business days of the start date. Government-approved acceptable documents must establish identity and work authorization. Employers must not specify to the new hire which documents that employee should provide. It is a best practice to provide employees with a government-provided list of acceptable documents. E-Verify, it is a voluntary electronic system, although it may be mandatory for federal contractors in some states. It must be used only after the Form I-9 is completed and cannot be used to screen applicants before hire. As of 2024, employers enrolled in E-Verify may use alternative procedures for remote verification, which I have found that very helpful. So that could be, using virtual document review, of course, under certain conditions. For the latest conditions, make sure that you check with the most recent DHS guidelines. And that is it for me. We are moving on to Christy.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, so let's start with the big one, the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA. We're going to touch on this at a high-level overview. Whether you're in HR, operations, or leadership, understanding these laws helps prevent liability and promotes fairness across your teams. You may have heard of it, but many people still get tripped up by the details. This law was passed way back in 1938, and even though it's been updated over the years, it still forms the backbone of how we handle wages in the U.S. The FLSA covers minimum wage, overtime pay, recording, and child labor protections. So it's not just about what we pay, it's also about how we track time, who is entitled to what, and when we can hire minors. It applies to most employers, public and private, and it's enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor. Bottom line, if you're managing people, time, or pay, you need to know what this law says, and more importantly, how to apply it consistently and legally. The FLSA is the foundation of wage and hour laws, and it's going to cover 4 main areas: federal minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, child labor. Becky, if you would advance to the next slide. Let's take a moment to cover 2 of the most common wage topics that impact employees every day: minimum wage and overtime. First up is minimum wage. The federal rate is currently $7.25 an hour. And yes, it's been that way for a long time. But here's the catch. Many states and cities have set their own higher rates. So what does that mean for you? You have to pay whichever rate is highest. If your city says $15 per hour, your state says $13, and the federal says $7.25, then you pay $15. Always check your local laws to make sure you're staying compliant. We're going to talk now about overtime, and this is where businesses can get into real trouble if they're not careful. Under the FLSA, non-exempt employees must be paid time and a half, 1.5 times their regular rate, for any hours over 40 in a work week. And here's the thing, you cannot average time over 2 weeks. So if someone works 45 hours this week, that equals 5 hours of overtime, no matter what happens next week. And again, just like minimum wage, your state may have stricter rules, especially when it comes to overtime thresholds or rates. So don't assume federal law is always the final word. Check your local laws too. This is one of those areas where the cost of getting it wrong can be huge. So building in regular audits and manager training really pays off. Next slide, Becky. We're going to talk about a classification that causes a lot of confusion and honestly a lot of compliance problems: exempt versus non-exempt. This is a critical distinction because it determines who gets paid overtime under the FLSA. So what this means is exempt employees are not entitled to overtime, but that's only if they meet 3 very specific criteria to be categorized as an exempt employee. First, they must be paid on a salary basis, meaning their pay doesn't fluctuate based on their hours worked. Second, they need to earn at least $684 per week. Again, this is a watch out. Some places will have a higher amount depending on where you're at. And third, this is where a lot of people can slip up. They have to perform specific job duties which fall under the executive, administrative, or professional exemptions. There's a few others like IT or HCE, but we're going to talk about the 3 main. The Department of Labor actually provides a duties test to help evaluate this, and I highly recommend we use it if there's any doubt. Here's the risk: misclassifying someone, for example, treating them as exempt when they're really not, can lead to major legal and financial consequences. These would include things such as back pay, penalties, overtime owed. It really starts to add up quickly. It's an area where it pays to slow down, to verify, and to document. Next slide, please, Becky. We're going to talk about record keeping. It is something that's not very glamorous, but it is super important. Under the FLSA, employers are required to keep accurate records for their non-exempt employees. That includes things like daily and weekly hours worked, wages paid, and overtime earned. These records don't need to be fancy, but they do need to be complete, accurate, and you must keep them for at least 3 years. Here's the kicker. If the DOL ever comes knocking, this is one of the first things they're going to ask you for. So it's better to have them. Make sure your systems are solid, your records are clean, so you don't have to scramble later. Next slide, please, Becky. We are going to touch on meal and rest breaks here. And this is an area that can be confusing. So we need to make sure we're doing things correctly. With the FLSA, it doesn't require at the federal level that you provide meal or rest breaks. But if you as the employer do offer them, which most employers do, you have to follow some important rules. Rest breaks, think 5 to 20 minutes. They need to be paid and they need to be counted as hours worked. Meal breaks. These are typically going to be something between 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what you set up, but only if the employee is completely relieved of all duties. That means they're not answering phones, responding to emails, covering for someone else. They are truly relieved of duties. And this is the part that matters when it ties back to record keeping. If you're deducting time for unpaid breaks, you must track it. Don't just assume it's happening. So I'm going to call out a little here on the tip. Avoid automatic meal deductions if you have a payroll system, unless you have a way to verify the break was actually taken. Systems that let employees clock in and out for lunch can help protect you. But if you automatically put them in as 30 minutes every day and the employee decides to claim that they never took those 30 minutes and you don't have anything to back up those records like the in and out punch, you as the employer have the burden of proof. Also, some states like California, Oregon, and Washington require you to track breaks and provide them by law. So make sure you're following state rules too, not just federal. And next slide, please, Becky. The FLSA also covers child labor laws, and these are your child labor protections to ensure young workers are safe and their education is not disrupted. So here's the breakdown. 14 and 15-year-olds can work limited hours in non-hazardous jobs. So you want to think things like office or retail, but we wouldn't put those young workers into construction or warehouse roles. Those would be considered a hazardous role. 16 and 17-year-olds have fewer hour restrictions, but still can't do hazardous work like operating heavy machinery or roofing. Again, we're putting those protections in place. 18 and older are now considered adults under the FLSA for all work purposes. Employers need to make sure that they know these restrictions and keep age documentation on file to prove compliance. And we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to touch here on the EPA, which is the Equal Pay Act. And this actually does fall under a part of the FLSA. This law was passed in 1963 and is designed to eliminate wage discrimination based on sex. It was a major step forward at the time, and it's still incredibly relevant today. The EPA requires that men and women receive equal pay for doing substantially equal work. And that means work requiring similar skills, similar effort, similar responsibility, performed under similar working conditions and within the same establishment. Here's a common misconception. This law isn't about job titles. It is actually about the work being performed. So two people with different titles but doing the same kind of work, they would still fall under this rule. I do want to call out that not all pay differences are unlawful. The law allows for different pay based upon seniority. So how long have they been there? How long have they been in the role? Merit systems. How are they performing? Are they your hypo or are they your underperformer? your production-based system. So if you have quotas you have to meet and you have someone who meets them or goes above and beyond and someone who doesn't, that would be different. Or any factor other than sex. So things like experience or education could be considered. Just make sure these reasons are well documented and applied consistently to avoid legal risk. So how can you protect your business? Conduct regular wage and classification audits, review pay equity across sex, train managers on overtime and break rules. That is critical. We want to make sure that since they're working with your employees, that they know what they're doing and that they're holding them accountable to those overtime and break rules. You want to stay updated on state-specific laws. When in doubt, consult with legal or HR professionals. And I think it's really important to think of best strategy. Best strategy is proactive compliance. So make sure we're thinking ahead when it comes to these areas. Next slide, Becky. Okay, thank you. I was looking, going, wait, I thought I had another one. So with the EPA, non-compliance with EPA or FLSA can result in those back wages owed to employees. It can result in liquidated damages, which often doubles the amount owed. Civil penalties, lawsuits, individual or class action. And this isn't always just about money. You can suffer significant reputational harm as well, especially when employees start going out on social media, start putting things out there about the company. It might affect your recruiting because you now have a, bad review out there somewhere. So it's really important that we're staying compliant with these things. We're being proactive with our two-way communication with our employees if we do have issues, that we're working through it. So that's where I'm going to wrap up here on FLSA and EPA. Next slide, please, Becky. We are going to move into FMLA. In this brief segment, we'll cover the basics. This is a federal law that protects employees' rights to take time off for certain family and medical reasons, while ensuring job protection and continued benefits during that leave. FMLA grants eligible employees up to 12 work weeks of unpaid leave per year for specific family and health-related events. It is job protected, meaning employees have a right to return to the same or an equivalent position. This helps balance work and life during major events like childbirth, illness, or family emergencies. FMLA applies to private sector employers with 50 or more employees, public agencies regardless of size, and all public and private elementary and secondary schools. So if your organization meets these criteria, FMLA compliance is required. Next slide, please, Becky. To be eligible, an employee must have worked with your company for at least 12 months. This doesn't always have to be consecutively, but it does get confusing, so that would be one we would have to look at. Have logged in at least 1,250 hours within the past year. Work at the location with 50 or more employees within 75 miles. And this ensures that leave is available to those with established work history and proximity to a covered site. Eligible reasons for use of FMLA include the birth or bonding with a new child, adoption or foster placement, caring for a spouse, child, or parent with a serious health condition, or your own serious health condition that prevents you from working. I do want to call out that there are also special military provisions, exigency leave, and caregiver leave for service members. Next slide, we are going to poll question. And I would just ask that you take a moment to review the question and answers, and then please submit your answers. We'll give just a little bit longer for those responses.
Maybe we are going to give 30 more seconds.
Thank you, Sanchita.
We have good number of answers. I'm going to end the poll. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so it looks like we had 98% coming in birth or bonding with a new baby, and caring for a spouse recovering from surgery, 94%, their own health condition or would be 97, adoption 90. So vacation after a stressful project, I'm thankful to see that came in at 2%. That would not meet one of the reasons to use FMLA. It would not qualify. And the attending of a child's routine parent-teacher conference as well would not qualify. All of the others would meet the requirements to take FMLA. Thank you for sharing that with us, Sanchita. We'll move on to the next slide, Becky. Although FMLA leave is unpaid, employees receive job protection upon their return. They also receive health insurance coverage continuation and are protected from retaliation or discrimination for using their leave rights. It is important to note that each state may have additional leave benefits pay that either extend, add on, or partner to FMLA. California has CFRA, PDA, like there's tons of other add-ons. It depends on which state you're in. So it's really important to make sure that you're checking what those are for your area in the state. And not only just the state, but sometimes the county or things that you're in may have different things that apply. So it's really important to make sure we are looking at those. Okay. And next slide, please, Becky. When it comes to FMLA, who is responsible or who does what? Employers must provide their employees notice of their FMLA rights. They must maintain group health benefits. They have to reinstate employees after leave has wrapped up. The employees must give a 30 days notice when the need is foreseeable, so they know in advance. Sometimes they are not going to know in advance and you can't hold them to that 30 days notice. They need to provide certification if requested. I personally, when I managed this, wanted to have certification, so I would always make sure I was requesting this. To me, that's a best practice. And then they need to also follow standard absence procedures. As I conclude this section on FMLA, it is important to note FMLA does not mean paid vacation. It's unpaid leave unless your employer or state provides wage replacement. Employees cannot be fired for approved leave, and employers may require documentation like a doctor's note to validate leave. If you have questions on FMLA, I suggest you reach out to your HR or you visit dol.gov/FMLA for more guidance. And we will now transition back over to Teresa. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Christy. I'm going to talk about some emerging compliance challenges, pay transparency to be specific. Pay transparency refers to policies or laws that require or encourage employers to share information about compensation such as how pay is determined, rights to discuss wages with coworkers, and pay ranges for open positions. Why this matters? It increases equity and reduces pay gaps, promotes trust and fairness in the workplace, helps attract and retain top talent. It also applies to job applicants, current employees, and employer of varying sizes depending on the jurisdiction that they're in. All right, Becky, can you move forward to the next slide, please? So the legal landscape, federal and state laws. The NLRA protects most employees' rights to discuss wages. Many states and cities now require pay range disclosures in their job postings. And I've listed some of those states there. Common requirements would include that they disclose salary range and benefits in the job postings, provide pay range upon request or during the interview session, prohibit retaliation for discussing wages, and also prohibit the disclosure of a candidate's current or previous wages from applicants. So that means asking about their current wage or their previous wage on an employment application, or when you're doing reference checks, asking about the candidate's current wage with them. Employer action steps and compliance tips would include audit compensation practices, update job posting regularly, make sure that you're keeping a note of any changing laws. Train your hiring team, supervisors and managers. They need to be aware of these laws. And prohibit retaliation. Some additional best practices for employers would be prohibit pay secrecy policies and include your pay transparency rights in handbooks and policies. Some states actually require that you put a policy in your handbook if they have a state-specific law. Penalties for noncompliance would include fines, civil penalties, or investigations from your state labor department, lawsuits from applicants or employees, and again, damage to employer reputation and recruitment efforts. All right, and that I'm finished with my part. We're going to move back to Christy in AI in hiring.
Right, let me come off of mute and jump over here to AI. We are going to dive into the evolving role of artificial intelligence in hiring here. We're going to explore how AI tools are changing the recruitment process, and just as importantly, what compliance and legal risk employers need to be aware of when using them. Employers use AI for things like resume ranking, skills testing, chatbots, or scheduling interviews. Some use more advanced tools that evaluate candidates' speech, tone, or expressions during video interviews. While these tools promise efficiency, the real question is, are they making fair and lawful decisions? AI in hiring refers to software that can perform tasks such as screening resumes, scoring assessments, analyzing video interviews, or even predicting candidate success. These tools are often built using machine learning models trained on historical data, and that's where we need to be careful. If that data contains bias, the tool can unintentionally replicate or worsen it. Under Title VII, the ADA, and other federal laws, employers remain liable for discrimination, even if it happens through an algorithm. The EEOC has made it clear if an AI tool causes disparate impact, it's still your responsibility. And if that tool screens out someone with a disability, you could be violating the ADA. Next slide, please. To reduce risk, work with vendors who are transparent, conduct bias audits, make sure any assessment is job-related and validated, and always allow for reasonable accommodations, especially for candidates with disabilities. Importantly, keep humans involved. Don't let AI make final hiring decisions without oversight. Cities like New York now require AI hiring tools to be audited for bias and disclosed to candidates. The EEOC and DOJ have also published guidance, and more regulation is coming. Globally, the EU is finalizing the AI Act, which may affect international employers. So staying proactive now gives you an edge later. AI is a powerful tool, but it's not a substitute for sound judgment or legal compliance. Use AI to support hiring, not to replace human decision making. Prioritize fairness, transparency, and accessibility. And as the law evolves, so should your hiring practices. Next slide, please. One final thing we're going to touch on regarding AI is key legal and practical consideration related to an NDA or non-disclosure agreement and how they interact with AI and hiring. First, if you're using third-party AI tools, the vendor may ask you to sign an NDA to protect their proprietary algorithms or processes. That's understandable, but make sure the NDA doesn't prevent you from meeting your legal obligations. For example, if a candidate asks how they were evaluated, you may need to explain the AI's role under EEOC or local laws like New York City's AI transparency law. On the candidate side, some employers ask applicants to sign NDAs to protect confidential processes like custom assessments or simulations. That's okay, but you should never restrict a candidate's right to talk about how they were evaluated, especially if AI was used. Overly broad NDAs could interfere with anti-discrimination protections or accommodation rights under the ADA. The safest approach is to review all hiring-related NDAs and ensure they allow for audit, disclosure, and transparency while still protecting your proprietary tools. Balance is key. You want to protect your methods without risking non-compliance. And next slide, we'll transition over to Becky.
Hey, Christine. As we're getting close, we're pushing up the deadline. I'm going to kind of cruise through this, but according to Robert Half report in 2025, 13% of new job postings were fully remote, which is up 10% from the first quarter in 2023. And hybrid postings rose 24%. So the considerations are you must comply with the employment laws in the state where the employee works. That's not where the company resides. Also, there's a variety of state laws. We're all aware. Some of them have different sick leave, paid leave, meal rest, and some local laws can actually apply too. So there's compliance tips for multi-state employers. You want to track the employee's location accurately. Some business systems like Microsoft 365 does have ID login tracking, but you want to make sure you notify the employees of that. You also include location reporting as a standard part of your remote work. According to a survey in 2024, 40% of HR leaders said they dealt with a case where employees moved to a new state or a new country without even disclosing. The other tips are stay informed on state laws, update policies and procedures, and register to do your business if needed. Especially your employee handbook. If you're a multi-employer, there are like 4 different options. So you want to see the pros and the cons of that. The common mistakes to avoid is don't ignore the state-specific requirements. Make sure you have a resource that you can go to. Failing to adjust paid leave policies. This is the biggest challenge. Improper timekeeping and no written remote work policy. And then the last slide that we have, and we'll try to get to a couple questions, is, make sure you do policy audits, training and education, and document and record keeping. Document. So I know we're very close here and we just have 1 minute. So maybe we want to just really quickly, Cynthia, should we address a couple questions?
We've got time for a couple, I think. Matthew
Okay.
Hamlet asked, what about asking for when a candidate received their college degree? You can't ask about high school. Can you ask about college?
I'll let you take that, Teresa.
I think that would also disclose someone's age. So I think it is recommended that you do not ask that question. Again, in some states, That information, if you do require that your applicants provide educational documentation, that information can be redacted from the documentation. So maybe check with your state to make sure
Great.
what laws are.
One more question. It's already 11. Can you ask employees to pay their portion of group insurance while on FMLA leave?
And you can at the federal level, but again, this would be one of those things that when it comes to FMLA, depending upon where you're at, may change that from the federal level to the state regulation. So I would really need more information there, Rhonda. Or Rinda. I'm sorry, I read that as an O. I apologize, Rinda.
So guys, can you put your contact information up so people can reach out to you following the webinar?
Yep, they can just, it'll just be me so we can streamline it all.
Okay,
And you can email me. Yep, there we go. At info@JERHR Group. And whoever didn't have their questions answered, I will be reaching out to them. This is Becky. So
okay, that's great to know. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Great. I agree. Laurie says it's a great webinar. And it really was. You covered so much stuff that people are confused about, and I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you for more information. So guys, mark your calendars and be sure and join us next Wednesday at 10 a.m. for our webinar on social intelligence for HR professionals. And everybody have a wonderful Juneteenth, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.